Assalamu alaikum to people of Houston. Welcome to another episode of Mehman Houston. I'm your host, Siraj Narsi. Today, we are fortunate to have as our guest Mr. Michael Kugelman, who is an expert on South Asia, particularly India, Pakistan, Bangladesh region. Welcome to Houston, Michael. We thank you very much on behalf of people of Pakistani diaspora that you have taken time to come to Houston to participate in the Pakistan Independence Day celebration. Michael, as I said, is an expert on South Asia. He is a longtime analyst and observer of South Asia, including India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. He's currently a non resident senior fellow at the Asia Pacific Foundation and senior advisor for India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh with Horizon Engage, a geopolitical risk consultancy. He's also a columnist of Foreign Policy magazine and writes in South Asia Brief, a weekly newsletter of news and analysis from the region. His experience also includes nearly 20 years of managing the South Asia portfolio at the Wilson Center think tank, and he was the founding director of its South Asia Institute in 2022. He writes and comments regularly for major media outlets in US, Europe, and South Asia. So you see a lot of experience of South Asia, and today we're lucky to have him here so we could hear his thoughts and his experience um, about the US-Pakistan relationship, which is going to be focus of this talk today. Welcome to Houston, Michael.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be back here, I should say.
Thank you. Yes, you've been here before.
Several times.
Absolutely, yes. And you have friends in Houston.
Many,
right?
indeed.
Yeah. So, Michael, Pakistan Independence Day, Pakistan-India war, Pakistan-US relationship on a new tangent, a lot to talk about. How have you seen the relationship between US and the bilateral relationship between US and Pakistan over the last 20 years?
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, this relationship has always been an up and down one. Many have described it as a roller coaster. So there have been some really good times and some bad times, and I think that the last 20 years fit into that pattern. So 20 years ago was 2005, and I would argue that that was a moment when the U.S.-Pakistan relationship was enjoying a period of strength. It was a time when you had a security alliance that was forged after the 9/11 attacks, really focused around counterterrorism.
Right.
So the relationship was in a good place. And 2006, which is 19 years ago, that's the last time an American president went to Pakistan. George W. Bush went to Pakistan for several days. It's been a long time since that's happened. But then, if you look at how things evolved, I should say they devolved, because several years after that, looking at 2011 specifically, was a really rough year for U.S.-Pakistan relations. I mean, everyone would remember what happened then: the Raymond Davis affair, the terribly tragic Salalah incident. And you had a number of other crises. And so I would argue that it took a while for the relationship to recover from that. And the war in Afghanistan, which was in its surge years in 2009 through 2011 or so, that's when you really saw a lot of tensions creep into the relationship, mainly because of differences in views between the two sides about the war. And of course, the U.S. was very unhappy about Pakistan's policies during that time. So then, if you fast forward a bit to the withdrawal from Pakistan, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, theoretically, one could argue that that would have created a fresh slate for U.S.-Pakistan relations, because the Afghanistan warriors had created so many tensions for the relationship. One could argue that that wasn't going to be an issue anymore. And yet, I would say that the last few years leading up to the last few months have been relatively lean for the relationship. I would argue from the U.S. perspective, once the troop withdrawal was complete in Afghanistan, U.S. strategic focus in Washington really shifted away from that region, including Pakistan, which I think is a shame. And I also think it's a shame that for many years, U.S. approaches to Pakistan have tended to be seen through the lenses of other countries, including Afghanistan during those war years. So this is why, and I know we'll talk about this, what's happened over the last few months is quite striking. I mean, if you look at the Biden years, the relationship was fine. It was workable. It was friendly. There were no major crises in the relationship. But there wasn't all that much happening in the sense you didn't have a lot of high-level engagement. You had some areas of cooperation in some established spaces, but also some newer spaces like clean energy, climate change, but not too much. But then, that brings us to the last few months or so, which have been a very interesting and different story.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned about the differences between different administrations' approach towards Pakistan, particularly looking at Pakistan through the lenses of other country, Afghanistan for once, and of course India also. And the people of Pakistan and the administration in Pakistan have always felt that Pakistan should be looked at through its own lens. It's an important country in its own right. Now that the recent events, the way it has turned out, do you think that the Trump administration, is looking at Pakistan through its own lens, or still looking at, regional lens or some other aspects?
Yeah, I think this is such a critical point that this relationship would work best over the long term if it's seen through the lens of itself and not through the lens of other factors, other countries, other geopolitical developments, and so on. I do think that what we're seeing now, at least over these last few months, the U.S. has been looking at Pakistan through the lens of Pakistan, because if you identify some of the areas that appear to be new pillars of cooperation, at least for now, we're talking about critical minerals, we're talking about counterterrorism, we're talking about energy, we're talking about cryptocurrencies, a range of different issues. Many of them begin with a C, but this is all very much focused on Pakistan, and I think that's a good thing. And one could argue that in recent years, U.S. thinking about Pakistan, particularly since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, it focused on Pakistan through a China lens, in the sense of, okay, what can we do to try to reduce the incentives to Pakistan for working so closely with China, which I think is a very misguided approach to take, because Pakistan has this longstanding alliance with China. But what we're seeing now is very different. It's generally a commercially focused approach, a commercial economics focused approach to Pakistan from a U.S. perspective, with the exception of counterterrorism and perhaps a few other areas. I would argue, and we could talk about this, that these issues that I've identified may actually not be the best way to base a new long-term partnership. But I do think it's encouraging, at least, that we are seeing an effort on the part of Washington to look at how to make relations with Pakistan work by focusing on issues that truly do relate exclusively to the U.S. and to Pakistan, and not to third countries or other issues.
I'm glad you talked about other aspects other than counterterrorism, because over the last 20 years, the focus of U.S.-Pakistan relationship was really based on counterterrorism because of Afghanistan situation. The Trump administration obviously is focusing on trade policies, on economic development, on rare earth. As you rightly said, some focus on crypto. It seems that Pakistan is playing to that tune. And Pakistan has recently offered U.S. A possibility of exploring rare earth minerals. Do you think that approach to the relationship, other than counterterrorism, particularly after the end of the Afghan war, it's going to bring a stability to the relationship as compared to the topsy-turvy of the past few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say that counterterrorism is actually still important for the relationship. I think the Pakistani side is definitely wants that to be a bigger part of the partnership, and we saw that signaling from the Pakistani side during the Biden years as well. Just because we've seen this resurgence of terrorism in Pakistan over the last few years, it's quite clear, particularly not coincidentally, since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan. And I think that Pakistan would like to see a stronger security partnership with the U.S., a stronger counterterrorism partnership with the U.S. that could perhaps include the U.S. unfreezing the security aid that was frozen by Trump early on in his first term. But just the other day, it was recently, you had a very successful counterterrorism dialogue, a bilateral counterterrorism dialogue in Islamabad. And I said this on social media. If you read the joint statement that came out of it, it was extremely positive, extremely effusive, no reference at all to discussions about aspects of the terrorism issue that could create tensions in the relationship. It was all focused on how the two could work together. So all very encouraging. And I think if you want to talk about any of these areas of partnership where you could see some immediate, meaningful, substantive cooperation and achievements, it would be on the counterterrorism front. I mean, as you know, we first got a hint as to the resurgence in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship when Trump stood before Congress in early March and thanked Pakistan.
Yes, surprisingly.
Very surprisingly. Who would have thought that the only country he would thank in that speech would be Pakistan?
Yes.
So there's actually some potential here, but I actually think that at the end of the day, there's limited scope for counterterrorism cooperation in the sense that the Trump administration will be very focused on looking at these threats, these terrorist threats that most threaten the U.S., and that would essentially be Islamic State Khorasan. It would not be Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan. It would not be the BLA and these ethnic separatists. So I think that could be a constraint. I also think it's unlikely that the Trump administration would be inclined to resume security assistance. I think it feels that Pakistan has been very helpful working with the U.S. to help address U.S. counterterrorism concerns vis-a-vis Islamic State Khorasan without needing to get any new security assistance from Pakistan. So there's that. But I do think, to answer your question, yes, I think it's very healthy for the relationship over the long term if you have multifaceted areas of cooperation. And indeed, I think it's less likely that you'll run into serious tensions when talking about these commercial issues. There certainly are big challenges associated with partnership in these commercial issues, but the best relationships are multifaceted, and that's what I hope the Trump administration wants to do with the relationship. I'm sure that's what the Pakistan side wants to do as well.
Good. You talked about President Trump's mention of Pakistan in his State of the Union address, which caught a lot of people by surprise. It's the only country that he mentioned. From that time until recently, when Pakistan was able to very successfully negotiate the tariff battle with the U.S. administration without really much challenges or hoo-ha, and Pakistan's magnificent victory against India in the recent war, 4 days. Do you think that has played any role in strengthening the relationship, and it has a potential for the relationship to ride on that curve for the next few years?
Yeah, so indeed, first signs of an improving relationship came with the counterterrorism success story, and that was before the conflict, several months before. But absolutely, I think that if we want to look at milestones for this resurgence in bilateral ties, you have to look at that unfortunate conflict. As you know, India was really hoping that its partners, including the U.S., would support India throughout the conflict, which would have meant essentially accepting what India was doing as part of a counterterrorism imperative. Of course, very few countries at all took that position. I think Israel did, and I believe Taiwan as well offered that position, but pretty much no one, including the United States, took that position. The position that the international community took on the whole was for the need to de-escalate as soon as possible. And that comes down to issues related to nuclear escalation risks. But I think that was certainly a blow to the U.S.-India relationship, and I think by extension, that was very helpful for U.S.-Pakistan relations. And then, of course, you get to what happened in the days after the conflict. The messaging coming from President Trump, his focus, his repeated focus on his role in the ceasefire.
Right.
I think that Pakistan, unlike India, welcomes third-party mediation.
Right.
Does not feel that it's a sensitive issue, and would want the President of the United States to make clear how the U.S. was very involved in mediation. And then, not for the first time, President Trump offered to mediate the Kashmir dispute. That happened also very soon after the conflict ended. And of course, as you know, for Pakistan, it's very important for Kashmir to be on the international agenda. So that helps. But then, other things have happened as well, right? I don't think we should overstate the significance of the India-Pakistan conflict in terms of the impact it had on the U.S.-Pakistan relationship.
Okay.
I've indicated why there is the reason to think that, yes, that was the case. But, we've seen high-level engagements between the two sides were beginning in the weeks and even a few months before the conflict began. And I think this comes down to a recognition of the commercial opportunities between the U.S. and Pakistan. So, a combination of factors for sure. But the fact that so many times, I think it's about 40 times now, that President Trump has brought attention to the U.S. role in the ceasefire, this is something that I think Pakistan welcomes. Sees it as an indication that the U.S. would always want to ensure that these conflicts don't get out of control.
Right. Not only just U.S. role in ceasefire, President Trump's personal role in ceasefire, and Pakistan has had no qualms in accepting it. And I believe Pakistan has very smartly given that exposure that President Trump wanted for himself. But I think that the India-Pakistan war definitely played some role because as a result of that war, the army chief got tremendous exposure to the rest of the world. And totally unprecedentedly, there was a lunch meeting between President Trump and the chief of the Pakistan army that has never happened in history.
Right.
How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, people are going to be talking for years as to what happened, how that meeting came about. So as I understand, it's the first time that an army chief has been invited to the White House when they're not also a head of state. So indeed, as you say, this is unprecedented. It's remarkable. I think that there's so many factors at play here. One thing to keep in mind, as you'll recall, that meeting happened at the moment when the Israel-Iran war was taking place. And Munir, the army chief, Field Marshal Munir, along with the Pakistani prime minister and a number of other senior Pakistani officials, had been in Iran just a few weeks earlier. And so, we've been talking about how the Trump administration views commercial opportunities with Pakistan. But I think one should not discard the strategic element here as well, right? I think that probably so many reasons why the field marshal got the invitation. But I think that the fact that at that moment, Pakistan was very much in the news for its engagements with Iran. And of course, Pakistan shares a long border with Iran. It has somewhat volatile, but for the most part, friendly relations with Iran. And so I suspect that for President Trump, there was a curiosity just to meet with this guy, with this army chief who had had a lot of FaceTime with the Iranian leadership, not too long before that. But, beyond that, I think that President Trump is someone who I think would be intrigued by the power of this man. I mean, someone who is very powerful, the most powerful figure in Pakistan, especially in recent months. So I think that likely had something to do with it as well. But, also just looking at the fact that there'd been a lot of high-level engagements between the U.S. and Pakistan in the days leading up to that visit. So again, probably be talking for years as to what exactly precipitated that meeting and the factors therein. But another extraordinary thing about that lunch is not only the fact that it happened, but it was 2 hours long. Right. There was a statement from ISPR, from military public affairs, There was only a Pakistani readout. There was no U.S. readout of the lunch, but the Pakistani readout said it was 2 hours. That's a long time for a president to spend with anyone.
That indicates it wasn't a courtesy call.
Correct. It was very extensive, and you wonder about all the things they could have covered in 2 hours.
Right. Yeah. So you're right about that high-level engagement. I think the Army Chief Trump meeting was a culmination of that, probably more in view of the Iran situation. But the India-Pakistan war proved beyond any doubt the deep relationship between Pakistan and China, which had been a concern for the U.S. administration. Now, the Pakistan-U.S. relationship is on a very positive tangent. In terms of geopolitics, Pakistan-U.S. relationship, Pakistan-China relationship, how do you see that balancing out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, Pakistan's official position for quite some time has been that it doesn't want to be in either country's camp. It wants to balance ties with China and the U.S. But to be very candid, in Washington, I would argue that there's always been a skepticism about that view. Not always. In recent years, there's been skepticism about that view. And I would say that many officials and others in the analytical community think that Pakistan is essentially in China's camp. It has this very deep alliance with China, and that its relationship with the U.S. is just modest. But indeed, things are starting to change. Now, it's notable that in the India-Pakistan conflict, as you know, Pakistan for the first time inducted Chinese-made weaponry in combat operations against India. So, those Indian jets that were shot down, Chinese-made.
You have confirmation of that?
I feel safe saying that. So one would think that in a different context, Washington would have been very concerned. It would have been a reminder of how problematic Pakistan's alliance with China is for U.S. interests, but times are different right now. And, I would argue that the Trump administration hasn't yet clearly articulated a policy toward China. And President Trump has, on the one hand, indicated he's still keen to compete with China, but he also has talked about wanting to cooperate with China.
Right.
So I think that it might be easier for Pakistan to convince a Washington audience that it is truly balancing its relationship with both China and the United States. And I think right now, because the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has strengthened so much, we are seeing much more of that, right? I would argue that each relationship for Pakistan offers its own comparative advantage, right? With China, you're going to have a steady supply of arms and so on. With the U.S., there could be business opportunities different from those that you get from China. China can provide infrastructure, it can deploy capital for that very quickly. But there's other types of business opportunities that you can get from the U.S. potentially, particularly when it comes to these newer areas like crypto. So I think that certainly works to Pakistan's benefit.
Good. Do you think that the regional issues, the regional circumstances like the war in Gaza or the recent war with Iran and Pakistan's relationship with Iran, Pakistan's position on Gaza, do you think that all of that has any impact on ongoing U.S.-Pakistan relationship?
I think so. We sort of hinted at this before about Pakistan's strategic importance. I mean, I think that I would argue that for the Trump administration, and particularly for the president, concerns about strategic importance of certain countries won't matter because this is a very transactional, tactically focused president. But, Pakistan can stake a claim to some strategic uniqueness, right, in the sense that it's one of the very few countries that have good relations with China, with Iran, with the Arab Gulf states, with Russia, to an extent. It's a friendly relationship, and with many countries in the West, including the United States. Not many other countries can make that claim. So I think that that's helpful. And I suspect that given how global events have been playing out in recent months, that this is a pitch that Pakistan can make to the U.S. So look, we can help because of these relationships we have. As I said before, I suspect that the field marshal made that pitch to President Trump when he said that, well, we could play a role of mediator with Iran. And then, if you look at Pakistan, I mean, it's not a regional power by any means, but it has very good relations with countries across the Middle East, except for Israel, of course. And it obviously has a very strong expatriate presence in the Middle East. It has very strong economic energy equities across that region. So I think there's strategic value there. And potentially, as the U.S. continues to look for ways to try to ease the volatilities in the Middle East, that maybe Pakistan can be helpful. I mean, the fact that Pakistan does not have a relationship with Israel might impose some limits in terms of its utility vis-a-vis the situation in Gaza. But more broadly, when you look at these various challenges in the Middle East, there might be some role for Pakistan to play. And again, I foot stomp the issue of Iran. I think there, Pakistan might be able to continue to play some type of role, particularly when it comes to the idea of trying to urge restraint with Iran, that type of thing. So that's something to look at too.
I'm glad you mentioned that because Pakistan always has a good relationship with all these countries that you mentioned. Pakistan has always been a proponent of peace in the region. Pakistan has tried to avoid getting into conflicts until and unless the conflicts have been forced upon it. But this strategic advantage that Pakistan has had for years, having good relationship with all its neighboring countries and within the region, hasn't for all these years hasn't been seen as a strength by the various U.S. administrations until I guess now that Pakistan is being looked at in that unique lens. My next question to you is: given all these ups and downs for the last 20, maybe even 25 years between U.S. and Pakistan relationship, what should Pakistan do, and what should U.S. do to make sure that it doesn't see any downturn, that it's a up and a strong relationship that is of mutual benefit to both countries and the people of both countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd go back, first of all, to one thing we discussed earlier, that it's critical for both countries to look at the relationship through a bilateral lens. And for too many years, you had the U.S. look at the relationship through the lens of the Soviet Union, through China, through Afghanistan. It's best to get away from that. And I, as noted before, I'm heartened by recent developments which suggest that the U.S. is looking at Pakistan through bilateral cooperation opportunities. I would also argue that it's important to privatize the relationship more. So many years ago, there was a senior U.S. official, Mark Grossman, who served in an administration some years ago. And he said at that time that 90% of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship occurred through government-to-government channels. And I think that number is far too high. I hope that number's come down because there is so much interest and enthusiasm within the business communities, within the diaspora here, to play a role in taking this relationship forward. So I think that to truly set a relationship that can become stable over the long term, I think it's important to try to create the incentive structures to enable these entities outside the government to drive the relationship. And again, I mean, we're here in Houston, which, of course, has one of the largest Pakistani American communities in the country. You look at the areas of focus of so many members of the diaspora, and here I'm not just talking about Houston, I'm talking around the country, tech, clean energy. I mean, these are growth areas. These are of great interest to Pakistan. If the diaspora is able to play a role in helping Pakistan move the needle forward in growing out those industries even more, make Pakistan into a stronger economic entity over the longer term, that would make Pakistan a more attractive long-term partner to the U.S. because of course, things are unconventional these days, but on the whole, I think that any U.S. government would be most comfortable engaging with the country over the longer term, if you've got a strong economic foundation. And Pakistan's economy, of course, it's a fragile one for sure.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that
getting better.
You can see that. It's definitely getting better, certainly on a macroeconomic level, but over the longer term. So if the diaspora can contribute in that regard, I think that would be terrific as well.
Excellent. Michael, thank you so much for your time. There's so much that you can talk about Pakistan-U.S. relationship, hours and hours. Not going to be enough, but we're always limited by time. Thank you so much for your insights. I'm sure the Pakistani diaspora is going to enjoy your talk. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we will have another opportunity soon for you to visit Houston and maybe another such discussion. So Thank you again, Michael.
Thank you.
Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. Thank you for watching American Urdu TV. Hopefully, see you soon with another interesting episode. Thank you.